Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillahi Rabbil alemin. Vessalatu vesselamu ala eşrafil enbiyai vel murselin. Muhammedin sallallahu aleyhi ve ala alihi ve ashabihi ecmain. Çok değerli akademisyenlerimiz ve kıymetli hazirun, İbn Haldun Üniversitesi'nin adeta bir geleneğe dönüşen 5. Uluslararası İbn Haldun Sempozyumuna hoş geldiniz, sefalar getirdiniz. ضيوفنا الأعزاء الحضور الكريم يسرني ويشرفني أن أرحب بكم جميعا وبالنيابة عن جامعة ابن خلدون وعن اللجنة المنظمة لمؤتمر ابن خلدون الدولي الخامس فأهلا وسهلا بكم. This is Ibn Haldun's tradition, 3 languages. Respected guests and esteemed scholars, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to honor and welcome you all on behalf of Ibn Haldun University and the organizing committee to the 5th International Ibn Haldun Symposium, which has grown into a proud tradition. Welcome. Bu yıl İktidar, İktisadi kalkınma ve ahlak arasındaki bu paradoksal ilişkel güncel boyutlarıyla eline alacaktır. Ekonomi ilerleme ve ahlak arasındaki aktüel ilişkileri anlamak için İbn Haldun teorik yaklaşımları ve kavramsal çerçevelerini analitik olarak günümüze koşul ve durumlarına uygulamak sempozyumumuzun temel amaçlarıdır. في هذا المؤتمر سوف يتم النقاش حول التطبيقات الممكنة لأفكار ابن خلدون في فهم واقع الاجتماعي والسياسي والاقتصادي والأزمات الراهنة وكيفية مواجهة المجتمعات إشكالية الاختيار بين التنمية الاقتصادية والعدالة الاجتماعية والقيم الأخلاقية. This year, we have a pleasure of gathering to discuss the pressing challenges and paradoxes within economic development and morality, a highly relevant discussion to be held in light of present global affairs, economic models, questions of sustainability, alternatively imagined future and precedents of morality and ethics in areas of economics and growth. Without further ado, أما الآن, şimdi de açılış konuşmalarını yapmak üzere Organizasyon Komitesi Başkanı Sayın Dr. Ramazan Aras hocamızı sahneye davet ediyorum. يسرني أن أدعو رئيس اللجنة المنظمة للمؤتمر الأستاذ رمضان أرس إلى المنصة لإلقاء كلمته الترحيبية. Without further ado, I would like to call upon Dr. Ramazan Aras, the head of organizing committee, to present his welcoming remarks. Please join me in welcoming him.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank you all for accepting our invitations and coming to our 5th International Ibn Haldun Symposium. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be a part of this important symposium. We are delighted to have all of you here joining us for 2 days at this weekend in Istanbul. I hope that you get a chance to interact with our distinguished scholars from different academic backgrounds and that we have brought from different parts of the world together. I want to thank all the speakers, chairs, and the audience for being with us today. I am looking forward to listen papers and learn about diverse Khaldunian thoughts, insights, and analysis on the issues of power, economic development, and morality. We have chosen these subjects because we thought they are crucial for understanding of today's world that has been turned into a place of precarity, political madness, violence, and injustice. As a conference organizing team, We have worked hard to make this event real and happen. I guess it was in early June when Recep Hoca put this burden on the shoulders of me and Faruk. Not surprisingly, it was just an order without any negotiations. As most of you know, sometimes it might be very hectic to work with Recep Şentürk. Well, we survived, and we are learning how to survive. Then immediately we extend the theme by including very respected names. Here I want to thank Bruce Lawrence for his knowledgeable and friendly guidance to reach very important scholars around the globe. Most of them are with us today. Lastly, I want to thank the members of our organizing team, Faruk Yasıçmen, Hibar Rauf Ezzat, Burhan Köroğlu, Rasim Özcan, Vahdettin Işık, Nihat Gümüş, Lütfi Sunar, Kamuran Gökdağ, Sönmez Çelik, Ahmet Abdullah Saçmalı, Hibetullah Ben Said, Enes Yalman, Ebu Bekir Kalkan, and Fatih Çam. Thank you very much for your labor, time, and faith for making this event happen today. Alhamdulillah, I guess we have made it. So I wish you all an inspiring, rewarding, and enjoyable symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you Dr. Ramadan. Şimdi de açılış konuşmalarını yapmak üzere Profesör Doktor Recep Şentürk hocamızı sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. أما الآن فيسرني أن أدعو رئيس جامعة ابن خلدون الأستاذ رجب شنتürk إلى المنصة لإلقاء كلمته الترحيبية. I would like to call upon Professor Recep Şentürk, the president of Ibn Haldun University, to present his welcoming remarks. Please join me in welcoming him.
Selamünaleyküm, hayırlı sabahlar. Dünyanın dört bir yanından gelmiş olan kıymetli misafirlerimiz var. Tercüme şeylerini dağıtalım. Ben Türkçe konuşacağım. Öncelikle dünyanın dört bir yanından gelmiş olan misafirlerimize teşriflerinden dolayı teşekkür ediyorum. Mütevelliyeti Başkan Vekilimiz Bilal Bey'e, hocalarımıza ve kıymetli öğrencilerimize, basın mensuplarına bu sabah bizleri teşrif ettiğinizden dolayı teşekkür ediyorum. Bugün burada çok önemli bir toplantı gerçekleştireceğiz. Güzel bir sempozyum gerçekleştireceğiz. Bu 5. İbn Haldun Sempozyumu. İlkini 2006 yılında İbn Haldun'un 600. vefat yıl dönümünde gerçekleştirmiştik. Ve hedefimiz İbn Haldun'un hatırasını yad etmekti. Orada şunu anladık ki İbn Haldun gerçekten bize çok yeni bakış açıları sunuyor ve Batı sosyal bilimlerinin sınırlarını aşan, bizim toplumsal yapımıza, kültürümüze daha uygun yaklaşımlar bize sağlıyor. Ve oradaki meslektaşlarımızla Uluslararası İbn Haldun topluluğunu kurmaya karar verdik. O zaman şu anda aramızda olan Bruce Lawrence ve Ferit Alattas eş başkanlığında böyle bir virtual society kurduk. Meslektaşlar arasında böyle bir birlik ve o günden bugüne kadar her 2-3 yılda bir Uluslararası İbn Haldun Sempozyumu yaparak bugüne geldik. İbn Haldun topluluğunun amacı uygulamalı İbn Haldunculuk. Yani bundan maksadımız sosyal sorunlarımızı, meselelerimizi İbn Haldun teorilerini ve metotlarını tatbik ederek anlamaya çalışmak. Yoksa İbn Haldun'u övmek, İbn Haldun'un hayatını, düşüncelerini tahlil etmek değil. Uygulamalı İbn Haldunculuk. Buradan maksadımız da İbn Haldun'un günümüzde hala faydalı olduğunu, sorunlarımızı tahlil etme ve onlara çözümler üretme konusunda işe yarar olduğunu ortaya koyabilmek. Yoksa İbn Haldun'u övmenin bir faydası yok. Yani önemli olan onun fikirlerini hala günümüzde de kullanılabilir ve açıklama gücüne sahip olduklarını ortaya koymak. Ve bu maksatla daha önce de bahsettiğim gibi 4 tane sempozyum daha önce yaptık. Mesela bundan önceki sempozyumun konusu bu farklılıklar, karşılaşmalar idi. Daha önceki siyaset ve ekonomi ilişkisiydi. Bu toplantımızda da iktidar, iktisadi kalkınma ve ahlak konusunu ele alacağız. Bu konu tabii bizim için güncel bir konu. Şu anda Türkiye'de bir kalkınma hamlesi var ve kişi başına düşen milli gelir hızla arttı. Her ne kadar son zamanlarda bir ekonomik sıkıntılar olsa da bir ekonomik kalkınma durum var. Ve İbn Haldun 6 asır önce ekonomik kalkınmayla beraber insanların refaha yöneleceğini, zevk-i sefaya dalacaklarını, ahlaki değerlerin aşınacağını, erozyona uğrayacağını, bencilliğin artacağını, grup ve aile bağlarının zayıflayacağını bunları söylemiş. Ama bunu söylerken acaba determinist bir yaklaşımla bu kaçınılmaz bir durumdur şeklinde mi söyledi, yoksa bunu bir uyarı olarak mı söyledi? Tabii biz Osmanlı alimleri İbn Haldun'un fikirlerini Osmanlı döneminde ele almışlar, değerlendirmişler ve İbn Haldun'un bu görüşlerini bir uyarı olarak ele almışlar ve refahın menfi etkilerinden nasıl korunabiliriz, bunun tedbirlerini ele almışlar. Şimdi bugün de benzer bir durumla karşı karşıyayız. Dolayısıyla güncel bir konuyu burada ele alıyoruz. Soyut, teorik bir akademik konuyu değil. Bu vesileyle ben kısaca İbn Haldun Üniversitesi hakkında da bilgi vereyim. İbn Haldun Üniversitesi bir sosyal bilim üniversitesi, hukuk, İslami ilimler, işte sosyal bilimlerin farklı alanları, iletişim, eğitim gibi konularda biz eğitim veriyoruz. Mühendislik ve tıp dışı alanlarda odaklanıyoruz. Hedefimiz Avrupa merkezli ve pozitivist bilim anlayışına alternatif bir sosyal bilim anlayışına öncülük yapmak. Çünkü şu andaki mevcut sosyal bilimlerin ne batıda ne doğuda sosyal sorunları çözme konusunda etkili olduğunu iddia edemeyiz. Bir sıkıntı var, yetersizlik söz konusu. Bunu aşmanın yolunu biz İbn Haldun olduğunu düşünüyoruz. Genellikle İbn Haldun'un modern sosyal bilimlerin öncüsü olduğu ifade edilir. Biz İbn Haldun modern sosyal bilimlerin öncüsü değildir, alternatifidir diyoruz ve bu alternatif olma özelliğini de İbn Haldun'un teorilerini, metotlarını, kavramlarını güncel sorunlara uygulayarak ortaya koymaya çalışıyoruz. Ben tekrar organizasyon heyetine, başta işte Ramazan hocamız ve Faruk hocamız ve onun yanında tabii isimler uzun, hepsini sayamayacağım. Hepsine teker teker teşekkür ediyorum. Tabii bir sempozyum düzenlemek her zaman için sıkıntılı bir iş. Yani mutlaka terslikler oluyor, işte biletler şöyle oluyor, gelenler olmuyor, değiştiriliyor vesaire falan. Tabii ekibimiz sabırlı bir şekilde çalıştılar. Hepsine çok teşekkür ediyorum. Özverili bir çalışma ortaya koydular ve inşallah bunun sonuçlarını burada hep beraber göreceğiz. Verimli, başarılı, hem kendimiz için hem ülkemiz için hem de tüm insanlık için güzel sonuçlar ortaya çıkacağını düşünüyorum. Biz uygulamalı İbn Haldunculuk derken hem akademik çalışma ve analiz noktasından İbn Haldun'un teorilerinin uygulanmasını kastediyoruz. Hem de karar vericiler, policy making açısından İbn Haldun'un görüşlerinin uygulanabileceğini düşünüyoruz. İnşallah her iki alanda da buradan çok güzel sonuçlar çıkacağını ümit ediyorum. Tekrar başarılı, verimli bir sempozyum diliyorum. Teşekkür edip saygılarımı sunuyorum.
Thank you very much Professor Recep Şentürk. Şimdi de konuşmalarını yapmak üzere İbn Haldun Üniversitesi Mütevelli Heyeti Başkan Vekili Sayın Necmeddin Bilal Erdoğan Beyefendi'yi sahneye davet ediyorum. Ama الآن فيسرني أن أدعو نائب رئيس مجلس إدارة جامعة ابن خلدون الأستاذ نجم الدين بلال أردوغان إلى المنصة لإلقاء كلمته فليتفضل مشكورا. And now I would like to call upon Mr. Necmeddin Bilal Erdoğan, the Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees of Ibn Haldun University, to present his remarks.
Çok teşekkür ederim Enes. Çok değerli misafirler, Sayın Rektörümüz, sayın basın mensupları, hepiniz 5. İbn Haldun Sempozyumuna hoş geldiniz. Tabii benim İbn Haldun'la doktoramın kesişen bir hikayesi var. Sayın Recep Şentürk hocam çok daha iyi bilir. Herhalde bundan 6 sene kadar önce, 5-6 sene kadar önce yine bir İbn Haldun Sempozyumuna bir bildiri hazırlamıştım. Ve tam 17-25 Aralık haftasına denk geldi ve o bildiriyi sunmak nasip olmadı. O günden bugüne de benim doktora serüvenim çok menfi bir şekilde etkilenmiş oldu. Şu anda da aslında bunu pek bilen yok. Resmi olarak doktora programından ayrıldığım ilk konuşmamı yapıyorum. Onu da bildirmiş olayım kamuoyuna. Artık bir doktor öğrencisi değilim. Ama kısmet olursa bir gün, zamanım olursa, yeniden o enerjiyi kendimde bulabilirsem tabii ki bu doktorayı bitirmek istiyorum. Ve bu doktora ile ilgili geçenlerde haberlerde okuduğum bir İsveç'teki taksicinin hikayesini anlatmak istiyorum. Belki burada herkes okumamıştır. Konuyla ilgisini de bağlamaya çalışacağım tabii. Şimdi İsveç'te bir Türk taksici havaalanına yolcusunu götürürken tam ödeme anında yolcusu diyor ki cüzdanımı evde unuttum, uçağı da kaçırıyorum, gittiğim yerde ne yapacağımı da bilmiyorum, sana nasıl ödeme yapacağımı da bilmiyorum diyor. Bu durumda taksici diyor ki sana kredi kartımı vereyim, gittiğin ülkede kredi kartımla harcamalarını yap, döndüğün zaman da hesaplaşırız, beni bulursun, al telefon numaram diyor. Yolcu nasıl böyle bir şey olabilir diyor. Yani şaşkınlıkla karşılıyor. Bunu başka kimse yapmaz diyor. Gerçekten mi, samimisin bu teklifinde diyor ve gerçekten de kredi kartını alıyor. 2 günlük seyahatine gidiyor. Harcamalarını yapıyor. Dönüyor, geri geliyor ve taksiciyi buluyor. Ona ödemesini yapıyor. Şu kadar para harcadım, buyur diyor. Ve bunu tabii çok etkilendiği için medyaya aksettiriyor. Ve medyada bu Türk taksici kahraman oluyor. Başka kimse İsveç'te böyle bir şeyi yapmazdı. Bu Türk taksici bunu nasıl yaptı diye konuşuyorlar. Şimdi ne zaman ekonomik büyümeden, gelişmeden bahsedilse ki benim doktoradaki çalışmam da bu ekonomik büyümeyi biraz daha nasıl sosyal meselelerle ilişkilendirebilirim üzerineydi. Son yıllarda ekonomide non-lineer ekonomi diye bir kavramdan bahsediyoruz. Yavaş ekonomi diye bir kavramdan bahsediyoruz. Neden non-lineer, neden yavaş? Birincisi, dünyayı çok fazla yaşlandırdığımızın farkına vardık. Dünyayı kapasitesinin üzerinde kullandığımızın farkına vardık. Aslında dünya 8 milyar insan için yetersiz değil. Ama dünyayı 8 milyar insana yetemeyecek şekilde kullanıyoruz. Eğer bu kadar hızlı olmasak, bu kadar hırslı olmasak, inanıyorum ki bu dünya 10 milyar insana da yeter. Ama öyle bir israf ekonomisi, öyle bir israf mantığıyla yaşıyoruz ki dünyada artık bizi taşıyamaz hale geliyor. İkincisi, lineer ekonomi modelleri insanoğlunun davranışlarını tam olarak anlamlandıramıyor. İnsanoğlu lineer bir makine değil, kararlarını lineer modellere uygun bir şekilde vermiyor. Onun için son yıllarda mutluluk ekonomisi, non-lineer ekonomi gibi kavramlarla karşılaşıyoruz. İnsan ekonominin merkez unsuru olduğuna göre onun kararlarıyla ortaya çıkan ekonomik kurumlarda non-lineer karakteristikler gösterecektir elbette. Dolayısıyla buradan İbn Haldun'a geliyorum. Değerli hocamız Recep Şentürk her zaman İbn Haldun'un nasıl hiyerarşik modelleri değil, halkasal modelleri, circular models, halkasal modelleri anlattığını, bunları metodolojisinde uyguladığını anlatır. Benim de doktoramda İbn Haldun'u bilmeden önce yapmıştım bunu. Yine bir İsveçli ekonomist, nereden kaderin cilvesi, bu İsveçli hikayeyle başladık. İsveçli ekonomist Gunnar Myrdal'ın Circular Cumulative Causation diye bir modeli var. Yani bir halkasal modelleme öneriyor. Bu halkasal modellemenin içerisinde bunu da ne için yapıyor? Bunu Amerika'daki siyahi Amerikalıların, azınlık siyahi Amerikalıların topluma entegrasyonu ile ilgili bir teori geliştirirken bunu kullanıyor. Diyor ki bu halkasal modellemenin içerisindeki her bir nokta birbirini tetiklediği zaman lineer olmayan, öngörülebilir olmayan bir eksi veya artı hareketlenmeyi hayata geçirir. Dolayısıyla O zaman işte Amerika'da diyelim ki azınlık siyahi Amerikalılar üzerinde bir ayrımcılıkla ilgili yapılan bir şeyin onların ekonomik entegrasyonundan istihdamına kadar birçok şeyi çok daha exponential olarak, yani çok daha hızlı olarak harekete geçirdiğini anlatıyor. Ben de modellememde ekonomik büyüme ile toplumsal dayanışma duygusunu ilişkilendirmeye çalışmıştım. Dolayısıyla bir ekonomide eğer dağılım toplumsal dayanışmaya zarar verecek şekilde hareket ediyorsa, o zaman ekonominin verimliliği azalır. Çünkü toplumsal dayanışma azaldıkça insanların ekonomiyle ilgili beklentileri ve kararları da negatif etkilenir diyordum. Şimdi dolayısıyla İbn Halduncu yaklaşımla bir halkasal modelleme ile büyümeyi değerlendirmeye çalışmıştık. İnşallah kaldığımız yerden devam edebiliriz. Ama İsveçli taksiciye yeniden dönecek olursak, hani bütün bu non-lineerlik, bütün bu toplumsal dinamikler aslında İsveçli taksicinin hikayesinde var. Geldiğimiz noktada hani lineer modellerle oluşturulan ekonomik düzen kimsenin kimseye iyilik yapmasını öngörmez durumda. Yani insanlığın işte ne kadar gerilediğini görüyoruz bu noktada. İbn Haldun'un da bu tür ekonomik büyümenin getirecekleriyle ilgili öngörüleriyle uyumlu bir durumla karşı karşıyayız. Demek ki bizim dünyanın şu anda artık ekonomik krizleri öngöremez hale geldiği, bir sonraki ekonomik krizin ne zaman geleceğini bırakın, 2008'de ortaya çıkan ekonomik krizin ne zaman biteceğini şu anda anlamaya çalışıyoruz. Dolayısıyla bizim yeni paradigmalara, dünyayı daha iyi anlamak için, insanı daha iyi anlamak için yeni paradigmalara ihtiyacımız var. Umarım bu sempozyumda buna vesile olur. Bütün katılımcılara katkılarından dolayı teşekkür ediyorum. Emeği geçen arkadaşlarımıza, hocalarımıza da teşekkür ediyorum. Sağ olun.
Thank you very much. And now we are coming to our main guest speaker for today. And I've tried to read your bio, Doctor, but I think we will lose the time of your speech, so I will not read your bio. I think you are well known already in the academician and in the guests' knowledge. So without further ado, I would like to call upon our guest speaker, Professor Wael Hallak, to present his keynote speech. فليتفضل مشكورا.
Thank you very much, everyone. Needless to say, I'm more than delighted to be in Istanbul with old friends and making always new ones. So it's always an exciting time for me. I'm not sure how the title of the lecture was printed, but as it came about after writing it, its affluence and ethics from Ibn Haldun to modern capitalism. The earlier title had something about positive liberty in it, and you will see why the old title still is relevant to some extent. I think it is a truism in modern political theory that material affluence or the development of a robust economy is a precondition for the rise of successful polities. For after all, the rise of the powerful modern state and its cognate modern empire are often explained, can often be explained in terms of economic power that enables militarization and the development of various tools that make political and other forms of domination possible. In fact, there is the argument that the rise of a polity to political success, if not to the rank of an imperial force, is directly tied to its fortunes, in accumulating wealth and financial resources. is a standard narrative. In modernity, we always tie successful states to money, basically, to economy. But there is also another side to this narrative, a converse of it, so to speak, namely that when such an empire or state loses economic advantage and sinks into debt and weak economy, it is likely to cease to be a viable state, and certainly as so-called civilizational empire. Now here, civilizational, always when I use it, I'm always going to be using it with highly problematic tones, because I will argue that Ibn Haldun didn't mean it in the way we have come to understand him. One can assume, therefore, that on this conception, money, affluence, and wealth, strong economy, in other words, are associated with the rise and maintenance of strong states and empire, and their absence leads to weakness or collapse. It is also a truism, following Marx and many others, that upon the rise of such a capital-based society, a relatively thin elite stands to command the main financial resources. What is most interesting here is that the more capitalist and rich the state becomes, the richer and more affluent these effectively ruling elites become. In other words, there is a direct correlation between the rise of financial power and the flourishing of political elites, or to put it negatively, the less affluent and financially secure the elites become, the weaker politically and militarily their state in turn becomes, and vice versa. I think it is only by articulating this as a contrast to the Khaldunian theories that we begin to appreciate his claims that the exact opposite is true, namely that affluence, wealth, and too much money circulating around, in fact, lead to collapse of imperial force. As is well known, Ibn Haldun argued that the Dawla's lifespan is mostly 3 generations, which he defined as roughly extending to 100-120 years. A generation for him was about 40 years. The first generation, coming from rough tribal cultures, are tough fighters and dedicated to the common cause. Asabiyya, ishtirak fil majd, that's his description of this group. This is a common cause of the tribal entity from which they hail. The second generation begins to lose this asabiyya and sense of common ambition. فَتَنْكَسِرْ ثَوْرَةِ الْعَصَبِيَّةِ بَعْضَ الشَّيْء, he says. Due to a transformation from badawa to hadara, from rough and tough lifestyle, hadara wa shazaf al-aish, to comfortable and luxurious living, that's taraf. In this generation, one strongman has monopoly over power to the exclusion of his associates. So he says, يتحول حالهم من الاشتراك في المجد إلى انفراد الواحد به. But it must remain true that while this generation has absorbed such much of hadara values, it has not totally forgotten the values of the previous generation. لا يسعهم ترك ذلك بالكلية. The third generation, by contrast, entirely forget this initial forcefulness and enthusiasm, and instead cares only about comfortable and luxurious living afforded to them by hadara style of living. In other words, they reach the state of becoming parasites, or as he says, no better than dependent children. They lose their prowess and sense of asabiyya and effectively become soft cowards. That's pretty much what he's intimating. At that stage, threats surround that ruler who normally seeks the assistance of strongmen against these threats. Whether his supporters win or lose against external threats, he and his dynasty are doomed anyway, because one or the other, that is the supporters or the foes, will impose their will over the political void and take over with a new sense of asabiyya, backed by tough and rough force. Again, the cycle repeats itself. By the fourth generation, the dawla and the actual dynasty that sustained it vanish. Now, this trajectory corresponds to another, which identifies 5 stages that are characterized by a different set of behaviors, by different kinds of ethics. What concerns me here is the 5th stage, where the dawla's leaders are preoccupied with luxurious and wasteful ways of living, israfun wa tabdhir, resulting in the acquisition of meek character, unfit for rule. Since we are speaking of dawla as the executive branch, to use a modern terminology, it makes sense that a soft and pampered army and military leaders are no leaders at all. I should say at this point that it is central for understanding Ibn Khaldun's ideas that we take sufficient account of his central concept of malaka, which he tacitly but consistently assumes to be operative all throughout. Although he does take the trouble of explaining it briefly, at least in 3 different locations in his Muqaddimah. But I think there is much more to say about it by implication. He really doesn't give it, he almost assumes that it is understood to the reader. Malaka, for our thinker, is habit formation that engenders an attitude to the world, but an attitude that is infused with an epistemology. At the end of the day, malaka is a habit formation that engenders a second nature attitude, khulqan wasajiyya, that defines how one knows and understands things in the world, with all the attendant behaviors that come with it. Malaka, in other words, is a full-fledged habitus in the Aristotelian Bourdieuian sense. Ibn Khaldun puts it straightforward. He says, Al-tarafu min awaiq al-mulk. Al-tarafu min awaiq al-mulk. But this is a very key statement, Ibn Khaldun. We should take it very seriously. To live in taraf is to be habituated as a second nature to the routine of it, which through malaka becomes formative, or rather performative, of a particular character, one that is soft and thus cowardly, which is the exact opposite of what an executive leader should be. Note here that Ibn Khaldun makes taraf a natural, even biological source of decay to mulk, and does not use it in any general or universal way. Just as age is the natural phase for human decline into disease, weakness, and eventual death, taraf represents natural or the natural stage of political decline and degeneration. So in other words, taraf is integrally, structurally, genetically even tied, politically, genetically tied into the idea of dynasty, into the idea of politics. The question then becomes, which of the 2 theories I have started my lecture with is correct? Meaning the modern conception of the state as associated with capitalism and power and money and power, or the Khaldunian version where money actually is the cause of political decline. So these are 2 drastically different narratives. Or are they? What I want to do today is to try to make sense of the 2 narratives to illustrate the fundamental problems we are facing in modernity regarding the sets of relationship between affluence on the one hand and power and subject formation in modernity on the other. But let me stay with Ibn Khaldun for the moment. My first simple question is this. What is the exact range of Ibn Khaldun's theory? What are its limits and fields of play and applicability? I think Ibn Khaldun is speaking about one fairly specific domain and its periphery, where affluence and government operate. To be identified first is the ruling class, by which I mean the members of the dynastic power. As can be easily seen in Ibn Khaldun's text. In the first generation, it would seem that as an expression of asabiyya, there is a pack of prominent men who work together. In the second generation, one of them subjugates the rest and renders them subordinate to his supreme rule. But irrespective of this power-based stratification, we are still speaking of dynastic members and their dynastic associations. The Sultan, his uncles, nephews, brothers-in-law, the generals and commanders, the viziers, senior secretaries and advisors, and the rest of them. Here one cannot even speak of the chief qadis or the muftis or the ulama in general, for they are not part of this dynastic constellation. The periphery for Ibn Khaldun is the civic elites that the dynasty surrounds itself with. These are also susceptible to the corruptions of affluence, wealth, and soft ways of living. But it must be said that this is a thin argument which makes a rare appearance in the Muqaddimah. The Ra'aya do emulate the ruler in his habits and indulgences. But they are never at the center of the Khaldunian gaze. They are mentioned once or twice in the text as being, to some extent, susceptible to this corruption, but only by virtue of their proximity to what we may call royal circles. The Dawla as a dynastic power of Umran is the core of attention in the Khaldunian theorization. One can argue that the Khaldunian Dawla thus provides an excellent starting point for discerning qualitative differences between modern and pre-modern rule. It is in fact the difference that may provide an explanation for the contrast I opened my lecture with. But let me explain as I go. It is important to understand that the Khaldunian Dawla is the function of the executive and vice versa. Namely, that the executive is plainly the function of the Dawla. The Khaldunian Umran and Hadara are not to be understood as civilization, but rather material and cultural construction of imperial cities, which allow the flourishing of learning, but also where wealth and accumulation of capital find their context and location. But this is not really civilization, right? Civilization is a very modern European term. In the Khaldunian Hadara and Umran, if the Khaldunian Hadara and Umran are to be seen as civilization, then how would we define the Hodgsonian venture of Islam? The concept, for example, that Hodgson would come up with, calling it the venture of Islam, as world civilization, when the Dawla and its association of Umran and Hadara collapse. If we understand the rise and collapse of dual within this larger context of Islamic venture or Islamdom, then these Dawla-defined phenomena are not civilization in the normal, even the widest sense of the term. But rather, in relation to Islamdom, they are local and somewhat limited in geographical, political, and cultural scope. This is not only because of intrinsic reasons to do with how Islam constituted itself, but also because the very concept of a civilization is distinctly modern, associated as it is with specific cultural and imperial European phenomena. And so if the executive is the function of the Dawla, and if Umran and Hadara are not civilization in any modern sense of the term, then we must understand that Ibn Khaldun was not theorizing about what we call today the social order, for this was not at the center of his attention. And this analytical dissection is important to make. In the Khaldunian narrative, this order is multifaceted and nuanced and cannot be seen to have one uniform color or form. For example, each profession had to, by necessity, develop its own ethic due to habit-forming behaviors. Again, he goes back to the idea of Malaka. Ibn Khaldun already understood, as modern neuroscience is now discovering, that human behavior is deeply affected by repetitive performances, and that habits of mind and body are neurologically formed by such repetition. Due to the nature of, and there is now, by the way, good amount of literature to establish this point. Due to the nature of selling, buying, bargaining, and quest for material profit, merchants, he tells us, are characterized by a lower grade of ethical conduct than others, such as the ulama and even the ruling class. Look, Ibn Khaldun is saying that the merchants are less ethical than the ruling class. We understand they are less ethical than the ulama, but he's saying that they are less ethical than the ruling class. This is especially true of the smaller merchants who strive to build their wealth by any means possible. He says, فكانت رداءة تلك الخلق عندهم أشد. However, richer merchants, especially those who inherited great wealth from their families, tend to be more ethical and socially responsible than their compatriots because, among other reasons, they do not need to resort to deceit or fraud to make money. Their businesses are already strong enough and all too well established to make profit without such means. فيكون ذلك فيهم نادرا وأقل من نادر. It is telling that the need to rise to this ethical stature is precipitated by this merchant class ambition to build a good social and political name with a view to associating with the political leadership of the dawla, Ahl al-Dawla, for there is a common interest between the two. In good times, these merchants may make money and protect their interests by virtue of the protections afforded by the Ahl al-Dawla. But in bad times, the latter, meaning the Ahl al-Dawla, including the Sultan himself, resort to these people for loans. They were always the source of borrowing by the sultans. Believe it or not, they were a major resource in case of sudden military campaigns or lack of resources. I should note that it is this type of civic society, the higher merchant class, that tends to be involved in the third stage of decline and decadence along with the Ahl al-Dawla, the one he mentions. By contrast, the ulama, because they have a different habit formation, are said to be much more ethical in their conduct since they are أبعد الناس عن السياسة. أبعد الناس عن السياسة. These are his words. This is in part due to the fact that by the nature of their professions, they are not involved in the quest of accumulating power or wealth. وَلَهُمْ لِشَرَفِ بَضَائِعِهِمْ وهم لشرف بضائعهم أعزة على الخلق وعند نفوسهم. Now, it is extremely important to emphasize one of the key premises of Ibn Khaldun's theory, a premise that has largely been neglected in analyzing his writings. This is the premise that it is in the very nature of mulk, of rulership, that it is prone to taraf, the profuse enjoyment of luxury and comfortable ways of living. In fact, he gives this as a fundamental premise in the 11th section of chapter 3, book 1. As I have mentioned, as again I emphasize and repeat this, إن من طبيعة الملك الترف. إن من طبيعة الملك الترف. As I have mentioned, Taraf is responsible for the collapse of the dawla eventually as a biological issue, right? It's become scientific, quote unquote, for Ibn Khaldun. It is, I repeat, because taraf becomes a way of living, a habit, a malaka, that fashions the subjectivities of the ruler and his associates. Taraf makes them soft and takes away from them, from their subjective constitution, the crucial characteristic of prowess, ba's. So now Ba's and Taraf become very important terms in the Khaldunian narrative. Once the ruler and his men lose Ba's, they cease to be fit for rule, this making them weak and vulnerable to the assaults of competitors who will take them over and establish a new dawla. And so Ibn Khaldun is not speaking of what I call the civic order, the social order that he was well aware to have been commanded by the Sharia and Sufi ethics. It is precisely this order which allowed the continuity throughout a millennium and more of the what we call Dar al-Islam in the largest sense of the term, as a civilization with big quotation marks. It allowed a long series of dawlas to come and go, all under the command of Sharia and Tasawwuf, and the enduring institutions they have sustained, be they the madrasas, the markets, the waqfs, buildings, streets, khanqah, zawiyas, religious orders, artisanal guilds, family and communal structures, and the like. If we go by the central concept of Malaka in Ibn Khaldun, a crucial concept in any social and political analysis, and one that Ghazali had articulated to a state of art in his Ihya, we will immediately realize that affluence and money are are not central concept of analysis in terms of decline. To put it differently, when there is Sharia and Tasawwuf ruling as central domains, as I have defined it in a book called The Impossible State, then money and affluence, and thus the decadence of Taraf, are not operational factors in decline, because under what I have called, after Foucault, ethical technologies of the self, they cannot be allowed to lead to decadence, be it moral or physical. In other words, the antidote to money is the technologies of the self. And of course, I mean, technologies of the self are endless in third domain, but we can begin, so you will have a concrete understanding of it. They begin with the formal 5 arkan of Islam, salah, saum, etc. But the Sufis has more of them, and other groups have articulated. In fact, one could say that the technologies of the self exist in all big religions, however you define them, including Buddhism and Hinduism and whatnot. But in Islam, you have a well-defined set that has been always supplemented and adapted depending on the group practicing it. And when I invoke the Sufi orders, I'm not invoking any trivial matter here. We are talking about massive body of the population. So money or no money, and Muslims had lots of it since the 2nd century of the Hijrah, money or no money cannot lead to political decline because of this threat, but in fact may be due to these technologies a source of power rather. In one place, Ibn Khaldun explicitly tells us that the prowess of the Rashidun caliphs, al-Khulafa al-Rashidun, for example, increased because of their total absorption in these technologies. ولا تستنكروا ذلك بما وقع في الصحابة من أخذهم بأحكام الدين والشريعة ولم ينقص ذلك من بأسهم بل كانوا أشد الناس بأسا لأن الشارع صلوات الله عليه كان وازعهم فيه من أنفسهم. This is strong language. I want to argue that Ibn Khaldun took for granted that Taraf is destructive of everything it touches, but not when a society develops internal subjective mechanisms to curb and control it. I think that it is not just because his work was concerned with the rise and fall of Dawla that he diagnosed Taraf to be a disease, but it is also because he was not worried about the venture of Islam, about Dar al-Islam as a civic order. I think Ibn Khaldun, like all his ashab, took it for granted. And when I say ashab, I mean the major names in the Muslim civilization before and after him and during his time by centuries. I'm in fact referring to a whole genealogy or genealogies of political thinkers on the dawla and on politics and history. I think that Ibn Khaldun, like all his ashab, took it for granted that the Shari'i Sufi central domains are the guarantees for securing a taraf-less subjectivity. And these domains were seen by him as enduring and timeless. Which is to say, in other words, and if we were to resort to modern vocabulary, that Ibn Khaldun saw in the Islamic concept of positive liberty in all its shades and variety, the guarantees for an ethical society that is able to maintain a successful trajectory as so-called civilizational entity, however problematic, again, this term is. You can tell by now that I hate it tremendously, but it's sometimes difficult to find another term to express certain notions. It therefore behooves us to see Ibn Khaldun as no exception to his Muslim colleagues before and after him on this point. Like them, he insisted on this cultural understanding of praxis, which pervaded all Muslim thinking on both polity and society. I want to argue that Ibn Khaldun's concept of ethics is at one with the common denominator of Islamic culture of what ethics and subjectivity formation are. And this means that the notion of the ethical technologies of the self as positive liberty of a sort should be taken for granted. I say of a sort because the Islamic concept of positive liberty, if I'm allowed to even use this expression, again another problematic translation, was still different from its modern connotation, although the general tenor behind it is one and the same. And it is here where we begin to understand why affluence and accumulation of capital and wealth did not have the same status in Islam as it is in the modern West. For the degrading of the individual into a docile subject who is open to state recruitment and capitalist consumerist subjectification become in modernity the sine qua non of empire and domination. In other words, while ethical formation was seen as the condition of possibility for the Islamic polity and civic existence, it was the opposite situation in modernity, where ethical formation and ethical technologies of the self were counterproductive for the rise of anything like the modern capitalism. Instead, the cultivation of the citizen, both as a political and economic subject, is in turn a condition of possibility for the powerful state and what it whipped up in terms of colonialist and flourishing ecocultural civilization, which Euro-America have clearly succeeded in doing. As René Guénon once said, the ceaseless effort, the constant material striving of the Western individual has become a habitus that is to be problematized in relation to what Isaiah Berlin, much after Guénon, has termed positive liberty, a concept in which freedom is attained by liberating the self through what one might call a Maussian training from need, especially from the materiality of the world. In his famous essay, Isaiah Berlin passes over the concept of positive liberty with near silence, a fact indicative of the general dismissal of it in Western thought. This concept would otherwise bear much significance for other forms of the individual's psychosocial development and for social and political organization. Of course, Berlin's virtual dismissal of positive liberty was directly linked to deeply seated fears of Soviet communism. That's when he was writing about this, of which he made no secret. But Berlin was also not interested in anything outside of the modern project, whether Euro-American or Soviet. But if we look at others, like say Guinaud, we find that they could appreciate what it means for an Asian culture or system to be grounded in a practice of positive liberty. Guinaud's frame of reference was the ancient and long-standing traditional civilization. He called it traditional civilization, which he also called Eastern civilization. In the early part of the 20th century, when he was writing, he equated Eastern civilization with traditional civilization, but doesn't mean by traditional old-moded, but he meant a very specific thing, which is that a traditional civilization always resorts to principles, never forgets and allows principles to be neglected. So for him, those systems of acculturation cultivate ethics and moral technologies of the self by their very nature. And of course, for him, Islam was one of these. He was a specialist in Hinduism, but also he converted to Islam and became a Sufi and understood exactly what that meant in terms of these technologies. The quality and type of ethical formation may be different in the case of Soviet communism, which is what was on Berlin's mind when he was writing, from its Eastern counterpart. But the idea of cultivating the self as freedom is one and the same. However much communist thinking remained constrained by concepts of capital. This is not a negative freedom that curbs external interference and control while conditioning the subject into a materialist view of the world, one that is intended to enhance the subject's freedom not only to need, but more importantly, to convert wants and material cravings into needs. Berlin's setting aside of positive liberty in favor of its negative counterpart does not only reflect a clear bias in favor of capitalism and a particular mode of political rule and governance, namely liberal democracies. More importantly, for us, it is an avoidance of, repugnance, and virtual hostility for positive liberty. This is so because capitalism, integral to Guinaud's critique of materialism, cannot survive positive liberty, yet it cannot live without its negative counterpart. So, in other words, if we really want to understand capitalism, I would suggest that we get into really what negative liberty means, because that's where the essence of capitalism is. It's not about just money and trade and whatever colonialism or domination or power it may generate. Actually, the real story of capitalism is in negative liberty. So for graduate students here who are really interested in these matters, I advise you to get into this very seriously, because that's where the nerve, the most important nerve, lies. So setting up negative liberty as the benchmark, desideratum, and ideal is not just a political or economic way of seeing the world, but it is rather constitutive of a worldview, a general attitude, a culture, all of which went into making the Western and modern individual, whether he or she knew it or not. Being a central domain, capitalism and its enveloping matrix, materialism, create a particular subject with a particular value system and a definite way of seeing the world and valuating, but not necessarily valuing, all its perceptible components. But we must distinguish two sub-concepts of positive liberty. The first of which I shall call invoking Althusser, Louis Althusser, Althusser's notion of ideological state apparatus, the ideological concept of positive liberty. This is the kind of positive liberty that we could identify in modernity, meaning within, let's say, this former Soviet context, or Chinese, or Cuban. Whereas the second may be designated, and this is my designation, as the individuated concept of positive liberty. So we need to break positive liberty into two concepts. It's not, we should not be working with it as if the term is apt at all. Individuated belongs more to the Islamic form of it. The ideological concept of positive liberty is more related to how the state, such as, for example, the Soviet Union in its own days, was dictating what it means to live in a positive liberty way. Individuated concept is individuated because it precludes the interference of an external entity that consciously, deliberately, politically, and ideologically dictates the terms of formation of subjecthood. Rather, it rests on the individual subject's initiative, which is to say that its range and depth vary from one person to another. It is the individual who is the only and final judge of whether or not to engage in the process of subjective formation, and the degree to which this engagement is to be performed. Because it is of the essence that it is a process which one operates on oneself. One operates on oneself rather than being sponsored by a state. Individuated positive liberty is an autonomous and relative field of play. It is precisely here where this form of liberty distinguishes and distances itself from its ideological counterpart, which assumes the individual to operate within a collectivity, political collectivity of some sort. The individuated concept is not a mere theory or utopia. A historian can convincingly show that this concept had a venerable intellectual pedigree and was put to a thick social practice in Muslim societies, as well as others, across centuries and regions, having been brought to an effective end when colonialism destroyed much of the Islamic way of life in the 19th century. So again, it was subject to colonial devastation. The story of colonialism is not just a story of changing markets and buildings and armies and conquest. It's really also a story about changing one form of liberty to another. If really negative liberty is liberty at all. I'm myself doubt it very much. This concept of individuated positive liberty has the potential to upend liberalism, changing it beyond recognition and, most importantly, subverting the materialist and capitalist basis of its social existence. Put differently, to adopt it is to change the order of things, to change the very epistemic order of liberalism itself, and with it, its subjective secular constitution. Obviously, the full ramifications of this concept entail the transformation of the two legs on which liberalism stands, namely capitalism and the political order, that is the democracy, liberty, elections, etc., that are installed to protect and promote the culture of capitalism and the materialist foundations on which it rests. To put it yet more directly, the concept of individuated positive liberty produces the subject who would inherently and intrinsically refuse, if not shun, the subjectivity of negative liberty, and with it, the entire economic and political system that sustains it. You will never find somebody who's nurtured in positive liberty of the type I'm telling you about, being able to survive in an environment of negative liberty. A close friend of mine in the car coming here told me that her daughter went to the States and she could not tolerate living in California more than a year. She just simply packed and left because, this is even the edge of the story. When we are talking about robust forms of positive and negative liberties, we are talking about two different, not only worlds, but two different humans altogether. I'm saying all of this, by the way, don't think that I forgot about Ibn Khaldun. Everything I'm saying here is really related to what he, in fact, was trying to label, categorize, and analyze. And the contrast that he draws for us. If Ibn Khaldun is silent on something, his silence should be taken very seriously, as you will see towards the end of the lecture. With this background, I want to return to the questions that Ibn Khaldun raised, or at least the questions, our questions, that his questioning pushes us to consider. I want to therefore to ask, why the taraf of affluence is detrimental to the well-being of the dawla, while it is conducive in modernity to the rise and flourishing of imperial cultures? I think it's a good question, don't you think? I think any serious reader of the Muqaddimah realizes that taraf in Ibn Khaldun's thought is directly related to ba's, military prowess. Whenever there is a taraf, there is a lack of ba's, which is to say, the more taraf there is in the dawla, the less ba's can be attained. Which is also to say that for Ibn Khaldun, as it was for every Muslim political thinker, the dawla is a limited phenomenon and has nearly nothing to do with the modern Arabic meaning of dawla as we know it today. The taraf is largely a military matter, a concept that assigns importance to the executive as a military might that is entrusted with the protection of what we now call public order and the outer domains of the kingdom or the sultanate. But how is taraf responsible for the decay and collapse? This, for Ibn Khaldun, is not an ethical consideration at all. Taraf has two chief effects that have to do with money and militarism, both being intertwined concepts with the meaning of the executive. Taraf is an efficient means to deplete the treasury, to overspend in the way of royal luxurious living. It is overspending, which is to say spending income in excessive fashion that leads to financial bankruptcy. But when combined with another effect, taraf becomes fatal to the dynasty. Namely, that when coupled with financial bankruptcy, the leadership, the military executive leadership, becomes decadent and soft and removed from the courage and military prowess that the founders enjoyed. Note also here that Ba's, what Mawardi included within the concept of shawka, was an essential requirement for rule in Islam. This has political ramifications for those who are interested for something else that is extremely important. But in other words, people think that military power, because we associate it with authority and abuse, is an ugly thing, is a bad thing. But in fact, the jurists, all of them, insisted on this. They wanted it, because that's the only way you can have an efficient executive. So if we have a trauma from European church abuses, we cannot apply our trauma to the interpretation of the history of Islam. But I'm convinced that we are all traumatized modern subjects, so we have a lot to overcome. Now, in this picture, we must be alert to stupendous absences. In this picture, there is a whole world outside of the executive that Ibn Khaldun is not addressing. He actually takes it for granted. It is what I have called the civic society, the social order that is largely self-ruling, and that is the source of income that the executive needs to maintain its polity. This order may continue to operate normally, without decay or collapse, while at the same time the dawla may vanish without leaving on the civic society, that is, any detrimental or lasting effects. Of course, there There are always changes and mutations in the civic order when a dawla declines and another rises in its stead. But the changes are not systematic or radical by any means. The changes, most importantly, are not systemic. The system never changes. Notice how many sultans came and went. How many of them came and went? But the Sharia and Sufism remained. The social institutions remained. If you trace the waqfs, the big waqfs and the small waqfs throughout the centuries, sultans came and went, nothing changed. Society continued to operate in the same fashion. So what is the function of these executive rulers? That's the question we need to ask. And here we must posit a foundational premise about Islamic history, namely that the dawla was never in control of the civic population in the way the modern state is. This is a fundamental premise whose analysis probably will take about 3-4 books, really, if it is broken down into its proper elements. There was no, and this is the biggest problem modern political historians of the Muslim world make. They do not understand that there is a disjuncture between what we call state and society in Islam. Not bad disjuncture, actually it was a very creative and important disjuncture, but that there was a limit to the executive. The executive did not have the power that any executive has today in any modern state, especially liberal democracy, out of all states. Again, another myth that we live. There was no bureaucracy or biopolitics or biopower to speak of, all of which, as Foucault taught us well, are the products of his 17th and 18th century Europe. In fact, if anything, Ibn Haldun, as well as all his Muslim colleagues interested in political phenomena, argued that it is the just and merciful running of the civic order, according to the dictates of the Sharia, that will always enable a flourishing society, one that can be taxed for the benefit of the Sultanic Dawla, which is mandated to run its affairs through siyasa Shari'iyya. So the more Shari'i-based governance there is, the more society flourishes and the more taxes can be levied. And therefore, the more powerful the Dawla may become. The problem is when the later generations of the Dawla, the later generations of the Dawla become, or Dawla's leaders become engaged in overspending in the way of taraf, that they become as a malaka, soft and incapable of military prowess. This is when the Dawla begins to collapse. Compare this with the modern situation. Again, as Foucault, Carl Schmitt, and their likes argued, the modern state is instrumental in the production of modernity, of what we call the political. The Schmittian variation expanded epistemically by Foucault as the age of biopower. Here I'm trying to collapse the two concepts. People can argue that there are two different things. Yes, they are, but they can be collapsed into one understanding in analyzing the modern state. And this is what I've tried to do in The Impossible State. Some people didn't get it, but that was my intention. I should have been a little more patient in explaining it. I wasn't. There is no king in this picture. There is no king, as Foucault said, there is no king to have his head cut off. The state is society, and the individual becomes the citizen who is the microscopic representation of the state. In other words, the state has both eviscerated and recreated the individual to make of him and her a citizen who is integral to the body politic. This could never be the case in the pre-modern Islam, since the individual within the civic order was an autonomous entity, just as the law was, a law that could not be used to fashion state subjectivities. I need not emphasize here the crucial significance of the fact that legislation, properly speaking, was never the function of the Dawla. So sultans and Dawlas came and went, as I said, one after another, without any of them even trying to declare themselves as legislators. Notice in the history of Islam, all of it. Another staggering phenomenon. In the whole history of Islam, 1200 years before colonialism, not a single sultan even intimated. I suspect personally, even thought that I want to have my own legislation, my own law. No one. This alone, another feature that will probably generate books and books if understood properly, with all its ramifications. The modern state without this power of legislation is, needless to say, no state. Imagine a state, modern state, that cannot legislate today. It's impossible to conceive. The same thing, a bureaucratic state. How can you imagine a modern state without the bureaucracy that we have? It's impossible. So what we have here is the national subject who is the product of what Althusser called the state ideological apparatus, one who is wholly in the service of state and capitalist imperatives. Almost every one of us is a state subject in that sense, at least paradigmatically. And it goes without saying that Ba's, despite the stringent military training required in modern armies, is no longer a relevant factor. If modern armies enjoy military prowess, it is not mainly by virtue of this Khaldunian Ba's, but rather by the military technology and advanced modern states have perfected. This, of course, needs money, primarily, and this money is procurable through the construction and maintenance of a capital-based economy. To allow the citizen to engage in taraf is in fact helpful and conducive to this machine, since the citizen, the Schmittian soldier of the state, is always refashionable as a military machine. This is not to be confused with the Khaldunian Ba's, since the modern soldier is skilled in the use of lethal machinery and weapons of destruction. The modern soldier is as far from Ba's as he is close to the advanced and sophisticated weapons of destruction which define him as a modern soldier. We know today the battle is determined not by how many soldiers you have or how big your ships are, is what technology really you have. And technology means simply commanding money to buy the technology. That's all there is to it. So don't tell me that the American soldier who invades Iraq has the Ba's that Ibn Khaldun is talking about. To sum up, there is no way for us to understand Ibn Khaldun's theory of polity's decline without understanding the difference between pre-modern Islamic governance and modern state structures. These are two different worlds that run by two entirely different logics. The Islamic polity was never a unitary political unit, where the executive was meshed with the legislative and judiciary, where boundaries between these were never defined, as is the case with the Madisonian model. If you want a brief critique of this, read chapter 3 of My Impossible State. You have tons of resources there and sources. Read them to see what the scholarship is saying about this. What we study in schools is one thing, like the three branches separated, and what the practice is in reality is totally a different story. Nor was there a fourth headless branch. Now it's called fourth headless branch. I would like to ask in the audience, how many of you heard about fourth headless branch? You have the legislative, you have the executive, and you have the judiciary. What is the fourth headless branch? Sorry? No, we could give it a head, I'm sure. Media is part of something even larger. That's true. It is, believe it or not, administration and bureaucracy. Somebody called it the biggest bloodless constitutional revolution that happened in the last 50 years. The biggest bloodless revolution. It is under our feet, but we do not understand. So now the executive, the administrative bureaucratic machinery is in fact playing a stronger part in ruling us than the judiciary, and the legislative. The only other one that competes with it is really the executive. That tells us where we are today. Please read about it, see how important this is for our lives. Now, the executive in the Islamic tradition was significantly separate from the legal and social institutions, which belonged to the civic order in the first place. Dawla has an ephemeral, rotational nature, hence the concept of dawla, tadawul, mutadawil, that is, as in the expression in Arabic, وَتَدَاوَلَتْ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيَالِ وَالْأَيَّامِ, right? They come and go. This ephemeral nature and its inability to influence the legislative power are sufficient pieces of evidence to show its limited civic power, a power that could not enlist the population in the way the modern state enlisted the citizen. This enlistment, what Foucault called totalization and individuation, created a regime of truth that enabled the political to mesh with the epistemic, creating the biopower that was driven by the machine of capitalism. Separate and detached from the ethical, capitalism turns out to be a violent tool, not only externally, meaning colonization, but internally as well. It enslaves the citizen and renders him a tool of the state to be trained as a consumer, a materially productive agent, and a soldier all at once. The state and its capitalistic associates, mainly the corporation, bank on capital and affluence as motives for domination and colonialism. Money and affluence make the subject, who is the subject of both capitalism and the state all at once. The Islamic performative technologies of the self, ab initio, precluded these possibilities, which is why Ibn Haldun, like all his ashab, never worried about this. It is because he and his colleagues were talking about a different concept of the human, that they never worried about what the critics of modernity worried about. Thank you very much. We entertain questions now or later? Now? Okay. So, yes, please. I saw your...
As I said, very interesting. One is the issue of the cyclical versus the historical, right? And or linear historical. You placed very nicely that there is that the social order operates differently under certain transcendent principles and so on. But then there is a cyclicality in the history. And I wonder, and you see this in all pre-modern societies, that even operational theories, I'll talk a little bit about the Chinese dynastic cycle, that there is this cyclicality. I wonder where you think it comes from. Does it come from the concept of time as cyclical? That there is, in fact, that in the pre-modern period. And the second question I had was about the civil order, which you contrasted with the state order in your positive liberty. So I was thinking, when you were talking about Althusser, I was thinking of the civil order very much more in terms of Gramsci's hegemony, right? And there is, I felt that yours was, of course I completely agree that there's a certain sort of voluntarism that comes from this. But there are also forces making it. Maybe it's what you emphasize, hegemony in this sense. Because, people don't have self-formation from nothing. They have it from ideology and they have it from institutions, right? And is there violence there in some way, and dictation or not?
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Very, very good questions. Let me begin with the last one because it's easier to answer. Unfortunately, it is sometimes difficult to come up with very different terms to designate that I'm talking about another phenomenon altogether. It's misleading even. That's why I didn't use civil order. I used civic order, trying to picture a historical situation. It's really more a historical point than it is epistemic or hegemonic or Gramscian, or it is that in Islam, and I think one of the wonderful works that makes this point very cleverly is a thick, nice book by Leslie Pierce called Morality Tales, where one, and everything I have done in the last 40 years supports the argument of this book, that in fact Islam, all of it, from the beginning until the 19th century when colonialism dawned upon it, created two worlds, so to speak, that lived with each other fairly well, but with some discomfort, but constructive discomfort, which is that there is the executive, and then you have the civic order. The civic order, that's why the civic order was never part of the life of the executive and vice versa. So the civic order was operating by how societies generally lived before the 18th, 19th century, which is something called self-rule. Self-rule can be a tribal basic thing, like a small tribe, let's say in Africa, living almost in isolation of other tribes, which is rare, but suppose even that. Or it could be, in fact, the whole Muslim city was to some extent, to good extent, to a significant extent, living by self-rule. In other words, it was not subject to the political interference or the directory interference of the executive. The executive was always separate from, that's why when you hear about the Waqf now, big misunderstanding in Orientalism, so well, the Waqf in Muslim civilization was subjected to musadara, meaning confiscation. Well, if you look at the specific cases, it's always that the musadara happened only within the men of the state. The rich men of the sultanate, in other words, the executive, would establish these waqfs with money that they acquired in their service to the state, to the dawla. So when the confiscation happened, they went after this money. This money was not legitimate money, because it belonged to the dawla. You cannot establish a waqf, a charitable foundation, with the money of someone else. It just doesn't make sense. But if you look at the civic order, the Sultan could not touch anything in it in that sense. If he did, and sometimes he did, hell would break loose. The whole city would go on strike, demonstrations, etc. So it wasn't like taken, that is the civic order that operated almost independently. It was ruled by the Sharia and the Sufi institutions. This is where, again, political analysis today, historians of Islamic constitutionalism and politics have no idea how these things work. We are still operating under the assumptions of 19th century Orientalism. Cyclical. The easiest way to answer this, where does it come from? It is, in fact, distinctly Ibn Haldunian. I think I have not seen it anywhere else. I know that there is much in Mawardi that you can find some resonance Ibn Khaldun or vice versa. But this idea that in politics and political dynasties, the rise and fall of is a biological thing. That's why I say it is not, people don't appreciate the full force of its biological conception. And of course, Ibn Khaldun didn't have the word biological to use. But if he had the word biological, he would tell you that it is integral to the dynasty to decline because of certain things, exactly like certain hormones or whatever they call them in medicine that make us age. Taraf and money play in that sense. And so Ibn Khaldun saw the dynasty as, and he says it very clearly, as reflecting the same pattern of the human body. So for him, it is cyclical because we have this, we live and die, and the next generation comes out, and so that's the cyclical part of it. But each each dynasty is one person. In other words, it goes through youth, middle age, and decline and death. So that's the cyclicality of it. And it has nothing absolutely to do with Augustine's notions and other notions which I have read elsewhere. Once you read Ibn Khaldun carefully, it becomes his own thing. Yes, please.
King? Yeah, okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
My name is Sardar Kaya. I'm an engineer, studied and lived in US 4 years. I have seen more Islam over there. More
what?
More Islam.
Okay. In North America?
No. Yes. In States. So why is that happening? I mean, why more Islam is over there? More honesty, more hardworking, more smile, more support. And I am seeing more blood in the Muslim world. I fully agree with your statement about the difference between the schools, books, and the real life. So my question is, can you put yourself in the shoes of Ibn Haldun and tell us what we are doing right and wrong in Turkey within the framework of totally corrupted New World Order? And when we are approaching to the Qiyamah.
Okay. Well it's a very difficult question to answer, but one has to look at it historically. Why are we in such a mess in this area? This is my area too. I'm a Palestinian, so I ask myself this question all the time, and I do have many answers that I have that go back though to the 19th century. We cannot answer our situation now until we know what happened to us in the last 200 years. And the second part of this question, very quickly, is that you lived 4 years, you said, in North America. I would like you to live there for 40 years, like myself, and then tell me if you feel the same way about it, as whether it is a better world or not. I don't have Palestine to go back to, at least. You do have Turkey. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the very enlightening presentation. I had a question regarding the concept of dunya and deen, where he, in his Al-Iqtisad, talks about the need of one for the betterment of the other. Do you find this kind of dichotomy in the Khaldunian thought, whether the deen needs the dunya or dunya needs the deen? Because your own assessment about how the Shari'i vision could provide with something that is traditionally far more relevant to our needs, we might not find that in modernity totally adopted to our ways of thinking. Is Ghazali's argument any close to secularity that we are searching in the civic order that you speak about? Is it not something that is connected with the civic order, that civic order have to remain secular in a sense in order for them to be functional, but they need somewhere deen. In what? It's not the Sufi ethics that he's talking about. He's talking about the way the deen is in need of dunya,
Yes.
and not the other way.
Of course, yeah. I would say that Ibn Khaldun and Ghazali on this point don't differ.
They don't differ?
No, I think Ibn Khaldun was severely misread by the Orientalists. Ibn Khaldun comes across as a secularist in the sense of even not caring about deen and religious values. But in fact, he was not different from the other giants of the tradition, including Ghazali. And in fact, I don't think that his conception of rationality is different either. I mean, these Orientalists, everything they read in Ibn Khaldun is wrong. I mean, there's absolutely nothing respectable in Western scholarship about Ibn Khaldun that I have seen so far that is well, I read the Muqaddimah in Arabic, of course. I read Rosenthal's translation and some French and other renditions much earlier. And I read, of course, the Muqaddimah all the time. This time for this conference, I would, as I told my colleague, I have read the Muqaddimah for the 15th time in my life, right? And and of course, I read the others. I don't see in Ibn Khaldun what the Orientalists have taught us for the last 50 years, basically, if not longer. I would say that of course, the deen, the dunya needs the deen all the time. There was no question about this. But no one questioned that the deen also would have no raison d'être without the dunya. I mean, they are twins as they say, they are twins always, like mulk and deen, and mulk and sharia. They were never seen as separate. But what's the meaning of this? This is what we have not yet managed to analyze correctly.
Doesn't Hodgson help us to
Hodgson?
understand that Hodgson's understanding of the venture, in a way, was a kind of a moral challenge for the tribal culture to transform itself to a kind of civilization or the civic order?
I mean, Hodgson, I just attended a few months ago and participated in a one-day intense discussion on, and my wonderful colleague Bruce was there too, on Ibn Khaldun at Yale Law School. Sorry? I said Ibn Khaldun. On Hudson. And one of the things that emerged from all the lectures, and again my rereading of Hudson for the fifth time, or fourth, is that the man is incredibly deep in spirituality.
All right.
I mean, this is what is the most striking, and he, out of a certain alienation with his own background, I would suspect, he saw in Islam, he was too perhaps American and too Christian or whatever to convert, but his deep sympathies with his understanding of Islam were to lead him to a reading of Islamic civilization that in whether it's accurate or not empirically, that's besides the point. That is quite impressive. Yeah. So he was in the right direction. If you don't look at the details, but you look at the spirit of his work, it's just a remarkable fellow on his own, and worthy of being analyzed from that perspective.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to close the the morning session. And I would like to extend our special thanks to all participants and attendees. Ahead of these two coming days, we wish you all a pleasant time and fruitful academic exchange. We will have 10 minutes coffee break, and we will see you again here.